All right. Hello, everybody. I am your host, Chris Carr, and this is Otsego 2000 Presents, where we speak to various people in the realms of education, conservation, just being awesome people. And today I have a special guest. Would you like to introduce yourself, my friend?
Sure. My name's Tatiana Height, but I go by Tots for short, like Tater Tots. And I am the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the American Forest Foundation.
Awesome. For background, I like to let people know a little transparency. We know each other through a couple of different events. I presented as well as learned at a DEI conference that the AFF hosted. I also ended up going to DC with the AFF and spoke to some Congress people and a senator. It was totally banana cakes. Took a picture with the big bison head in one of the senatorial offices. But anyway, um, I want to bring in people that can expand our awareness, our knowledge. And you may initially be like, well, what does this have to do with us in Otsego County? And so I purposely want to bring in perspectives that can give us best practices, give us ideas, principles that we can implement that may not just be germane to something local, but like general ideas, concepts, theories, structures, dynamics that seem to have application possibly nationwide. So, without getting to the specifics of your job, can you let me know a little bit about your background, your experience, what got you into DEI, and how that overlapped and you end up in conservation?
Hmm. Well, let's see. So when I went to undergrad, I went in to study environmental studies with an emphasis in natural resources. And I really didn't know what I was going to do with that. Um, I did an internship on environmental education when I was in my sophomore year, like the second semester of my sophomore year. And then I thought maybe I would do something with environmental education. My junior year, I took a class where they talked about, it was just like a small session, like a 1 week module where they introduced the concept of environmental justice and environmental racism. And then I was just like so blown away. That I wrote a paper, like we had to do reaction papers on different things. And I wrote my paper, and the TA for the class like wrote on it and was like, it looks like you found your passion. And ever since then, I've been doing environmental justice work. So um
Well, what
I
initially even got you into conservation or environmental sciences, or as a young person, were you a natural, interested wanderer kind of individual?
I don't know that I was an interested wanderer, but I come from a community. I'm from Chicago. So I'm from a very, I guess, more blue progressive kind of area. So I was always in a community where like there was no question about whether or not climate change is real. Recycling was just kind of something you do. And so I always got messages. Like I remember even being, a kiddo in classes in elementary school, and they're talking to us about acid rain and dealing with the acid rain problem. And so I just always knew that environment was something important to deal with. But then when I was in high school, I did a summer science program. As a result of my AP chemistry class, they were like, oh, if you do a summer science program, it usually leads to a job. I wanted a summer job. So I did the summer science program at the local university. And then after that, the job was like being on the green team for this nonprofit. And so we did like planting of raised bed gardens and picking up litter and removing invasive species at the national parks. And that ended up segueing into me being invited to start an after school program about brownfields. And I got to like go to New Orleans and do habitat restoration down there. And so then when it got time for me to figure out what I was going to go to college for, I had thought before that I was going to do political science pre-law. But then I realized that you could go to school to study environment and stuff. And I was like, oh, well, I'm going to do that then. So that's why I even decided to do the environmental studies and natural resources for undergrad, um, was because of that summer science program.
When you were younger, did you find yourself amongst a fair number of other young people as either focused, dedicated, or already directed in high school? Or were you somewhat unique in that? Was there reinforcement? Kind of what allowed you to have that wherewithal kind of young?
Definitely not on environmental stuff, but just on stuff. Yeah. So I was in what we call the gifted and talented program from the time I was in first grade. I went to a gifted school. Um, well, first, even before that, like there was like a half day kindergarten program. And I remember I was taken out of the half day program and put into the full day because they said I was too like advanced, I guess, for just the half day program. Like, oh, you need to go to a full day program. And then I ended up going to the gifted elementary school and the gifted middle school, and then been in the gifted and talented program in my high school because there was regular ed as well as gifted ed in the same school. And so because of the classes that I was in, it was always assumed that you're going to college. It was not discussed as like an optional thing. I don't everybody in the gifted and talented program really, save for a handful of people, went to college. It was just like a thing. And even in my own household, my parents always talked to us as though we were definitely going to college. It was not discussed as though it was an optional thing. Now, of course, you can, they would kind of say, like, of course, you can do whatever you want, like, have a job, a trade, whatever, whatever. But there was still this expectation that the thing you would choose would be college. So, uh, I just
Yeah.
never, yeah.
I mean, it's something that's difficult to explain, but my family is very similar, and they were like, "Oh, we love you. Do whatever you want in life. Doctor, lawyer, engineer, teacher. And of course, you can be a trash man, but you better own the company. You better be the best trash man in the whole city, possibly state." And it's like, well, hold on. That's a I don't know if that's I can do whatever I want. But again, it's all love. As a as a young person in DC, I ran into an issue of there almost being a binary of social justice and caring about Black people and Black issues and environmental issues like save the whales or, what have you. And for some reason, they didn't overlap a lot. The people that seem to be very concerned with the Greenpeace activities and willing to jump in front of a harpoon wouldn't go to the march. And the folks who were at the marches were like, I'm definitely not going to get in a boat and save whales. What was your experience with that growing up?
It's the same. It's the
Okay.
same. Yeah. I it's definitely it's noticeable. Now, I have to specifically put myself in environmental justice spaces in order to see the merger of those two things. And I'm somebody who um works just in conservation in general and environmental issues in general. I consider myself an environment generalist and that I've touched a lot of different areas in natural resources. And when I'm in just those natural resources spaces, that's just what it is. There's not tend to be conversations about racial justice. Like even growing up and doing that program that I did in high school, the summer science program and all of that, in a predominantly Black community, we were not talking about environmental justice. Like I said, I didn't hear that until my junior year in undergrad. So and the community that we were doing that stuff in also is like a case that I later saw in textbooks about environmental racism. And I'm like, y'all didn't mention this at all. So,
Well,
um,
well, then for people who are unfamiliar, can you maybe give us a intro? Because I know you can teach classes on this, but like an intro to when you say environmental justice, what that means in this context, because someone may take that to mean, oh, do you just mean we want to keep the animals safe? We want to
oh
make
yeah.
sure the trees don't get all cut down. So what do you mean by environmental justice?
It's funny you say that because I've literally taught classes and I'm like, what does environmental justice mean? And then they say what you just said. They'll be like, it means that all of the species or whatever. Mm-mm. Now, there is a concept called eco justice that really refers to like the rights and determination of all of the species. But environmental justice refers to self determination of communities to really make land use decisions in their communities, not being exploited because we've seen in terms of environmental racism basically that Black and Brown communities, communities who have higher proportions of people who are from racially minoritized groups, are overburdened environmentally. So we'll see things like the placement of hazardous waste facilities in those communities. We'll see things like resources being over extracted, pollutants being over polluted, all of that kind of stuff in Black and Brown communities. And so basically, it's this intersection of institutional racism and environmental degradation coming together to create a unique problem for people who are in marginalized communities.
Do you see this as a field people are starting to gain more understanding or familiarity with this field? Is this something that's kind of new to non-Black folks? Where's your take on how this sits in the dialogue?
I guess it depends on how knowledgeable a person wants to be. We live in a society where people are practicing willful ignorance all the time. Like, look at
Wait,
what
wait,
happened in
can you say that again, please?
we live in a society where people are practicing willful ignorance all of the time. Like in 2020, when George Floyd and everything happened, we heard people say, "I thought racism didn't wasn't a problem anymore. I thought that this police brutality didn't exist anymore. I thought we were beyond this." Um, and so I think the extent to which people are knowledgeable about environmental racism and environmental justice really depends on the extent to which they wanted to open their eyes and pay attention to what was going on. So it probably will depend on who you're asking and what their positionality is, where they came from, and what they've chosen to expose themselves to. As somebody who, outside of my position at AFF, has taught college classes and taught about sustainability and environmental justice and environmental racism, I have students um, predominantly white classes who are just like, I don't know what you're talking. You're telling me about something that I've never heard of before. Um, it's rare that I have students who are already knowledgeable about this. They're coming from countries or from states all over the country. And they're just like, you're telling me about something that I just am totally, and they're just shocked. They're shocked. Looking at cases from the 1970s to present day, and they're just like, how is this going on? I had no idea. So, or even speaking to adults, like I've been invited to talk to a number of different nonprofits and organizations because they know that I do environmental justice as my thing. So, like, come and talk to our organization. And then I tell them about what's going on, and they're just like, this is something me, even as an adult, as somebody who works in environment or conservation or even just in community, something like I had botanists. There was a group of botanists who wanted me to come and talk to them. So they're interested in just plants and stuff. And they're like, what? You're blowing my mind with this stuff. So in my experience and what I've seen, I've not seen a lot of people unless they are just really into being aware. I don't want to use a terminology word that's triggering for people to describe what I'm saying, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, as an example of parallelism with in general, when people think of environmental justice, or we think of like the human engagement with our environment and safety and what can happen under capitalism, the idea of putting up a chemical plant, like in the Gulf Coast, there are a number of chemical plants or petroleum plants or plastic uh, manufacturers, and the materials from them get into the groundwater or get into the riverbeds or what have you, and entire communities are affected. And it seems like when the majority community is affected enough, law firms get involved, you may get a story, and people become aware. What they aren't often told is that there's another part of the town that's full of Black people, because you're in a segregated area, that are affected in a way where they don't get the monetary compensation. They may not have access to the medical care after. And it may have been not quite happenstance of where different people have been allowed to own housing, own land, or where the uh, company or petroleum entity has set up. Is that something getting towards what you're talking about here?
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Like you can't talk about environmental justice. I mean, the solutions, like environmental justice, I see as a solution, and environmental racism or environmental injustice being sort of the problem. So you can't talk about environmental racism without talking about redlining and how that was a tool that was used to segregate communities. And in the class that I teach on segregation, we have this whole medical unit. Like to me, like some of the work that I do, like just on the side and when I be writing and stuff, is about like medical racism and the intersections with that and environmental justice. So like when you're talking about being able to access healthcare after being exposed like that, like I have a book chapter that was submitted that should be getting published at some point for a textbook on environmental exposure. Yeah, that talks about like, okay, then how does this compound with this medical racism issue? And how does this, also intersect with healthcare? So yeah, and I oftentimes encourage people to read The Color of Law, to learn about like zoning laws and how those have furthered segregation. Like, what does that have to do with this idea of environmental? Because you can't disproportionately impact a community. You can't target them in that way if everybody's mixed in together. When you've separated people, it makes it easier for you to then target them to just expose that one group because they're separate from the group that doesn't want to deal with the exposure.
So you've led us to part of the discussion I was looking forward to is, what do you do then when you're in a county like Otsego County, which is 96 to 98% homogeneous, there are amazing outdoor wilderness, natural areas, and we want to encourage people to experience them to possibly better their mental health by spending time in nature, physical health by maybe owning land where you can grow your own food and what have you, where there are no Black people at the time. How do you break through that historical segregation? And I know people watching this are like, hey, we're environmentalists. How does this overlap? And for me, I am a holistic person where I think humans are part of the environment. I think humans are part of ecology. And I think the other humans we live with are part of our ecological system. And having diversity amongst that is just a better life in my mind. But how do you then foment that? How do you start movement towards being aware of the needs of new community members, being aware of the history that has stopped community members or has led to 98% one group being in a place?
Yeah, I mean, educating people is definitely so the city of Raleigh in North Carolina had done like this. Lord have mercy if I cannot remember the like name of the group, but there was the government, the city government had put together this group to basically deal with, the human and community experiences of people. And they had a reading group where they were talking about different books to just educate any community member who wanted to learn about the disenfranchisement of various groups could come and participate in this reading group and just start to learn. So I think that's a cool thing that if you really advertise it and people are really aware of it, you can start to educate people and hopefully do it in a space where, people feel like they can actually come and talk about it. I have so many times where I'm facilitating conversations and people are sharing, their own, like the feelings around how people using the words like privilege and things like that and how they have felt attacked or guilty or whatever. So making sure that you're creating a space where people can even have those conversations, I think can happen from community organizations or it can even happen from the government actually facilitating those conversations. In terms of dealing with it, I mean, I guess it depends on the resources and like the situation that you have. There is an organization. I've been in the Carolinas for a long time, so like a lot of like what I'm saying is going to be Carolina specific, but y'all can take some examples from this. But um, there's an organization. I think it's called the Triangle Land Conservancy, who has a program specifically for people who want to own land who are from racially minoritized backgrounds to help to create a pathway to them to own land that'll then be under conservation programs. So um, they will acquire some property and then resell it back to a member of like a Black, Indigenous, or person of color at a rate that is lower than the appraised value of the property. And then they'll buy it with like conservation easements on it. So it's a conservation benefit, it's a racial benefit, it's helping to diversify the land ownership in the community. Like having programs like that, I think is really beneficial. Um, so I think, education, following that up with some actual dollars to take some action and see what the specific community needs. And I think also sometimes you have to be creative about um, just like how you're going about trying to identify people. And just because there's a small number of people doesn't mean that their experiences, aren't valid or don't matter. So even if it's not a high proportion of people who might identify as being a part of a marginalized community, that does not mean that it's not worth doing something for even those individuals who live there and making space for others as well. So
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate giving some actionable items people can do and really the levels. I think in speaking to different folks, are individuals able to put an effort at a level of educate self? Is it participate in community activities? Is it figure out how to get the funding together? Is it better amplify people that are already in the space? And so I would encourage folks out there, whether it's happening in North Carolina, California, Maine, if there are things people have found that have worked in communities, to try to glean what you can from it. And so I purposely am not only speaking to folks that are from our county, because I like the perspective and I enjoy the optimism. Now, in terms of us working together and knowing each other with the AFF, there were some particular programs around conservation and forestry and family forest owners. For the folks out there that are Black, that self-identify as Black, that identify as a person of color, where do you historically, I haven't seen as much in the realm of conservation, forest ownership, and definitely not owning land you can't build on.
Mhm.
So, what do we say to encourage more folks? Because how I know you is we bought land and I started calling everybody all around the country, emailing everyone around the country, being like, I don't know what I'm doing. I think I want to do this. How do I learn more? And I met all these amazing people and then found out, like, oh, we are out here. But to folks that may not have my inclination, aren't kind of used to like, yo, I rap, I got to make sure I'm out here. What can we say to encourage them?
Yeah. What can we say to encourage people? I mean, I would say that we all have our own role to play. So I think that sometimes people are overwhelmed or intimidated because they feel like they have to occupy every lane or because they see what somebody else is doing and they feel like they can't do that or they don't have enough time. We all have our own like role to play in movement building and in making change. And just because you're, that ambitious and knowledgeable doesn't mean that, everybody's going to be like that and everybody's going to have that same drive and motivation, but it also doesn't mean that they can't do something. So I would say just like think about what you can do and what are your own personal resources and what are you good at and capitalize on those things. Um, can I make some book recommendations to people?
Please,
I
please.
love a good book. And so I'm like, there's books. So there's a book called Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown, where she talks about, read anything by Adrienne Marie Brown, but where she talks about uh like how we can all, and she talks about it from an ecosystem perspective and like how people can have a role in this ecosystem of making social change. I know this person is also kind of uh sometimes seen as polarizing, but I'm going to recommend his book anyway because it's phenomenal. Make Change by Sean King, where he talks about like, just trying to figure out what, like, okay, I'm an accountant, and how can I use my accounting skills in making social change, or like I'm really good at talking to people, or I'm not really that good person who's like should be the face of this thing, but maybe I have some skill that I can use on the back end, and like how can I engage in that way. So that's a good book to just like start to think about people and how they can start to be a part of the movement. There's another book called Better Than We Found It by Frederick Joseph and his wife Portia Joseph, where they talk about all kind of different areas of society. Climate change is one of the issues that they hit on, and the wealth gap, which is relevant to land ownership, and like give you practical things like you can do to get engaged on stuff. And they have a website, betterthanwefounditbook.com, where they break down all of those resources and like how can a person get engaged. So I think just don't get overwhelmed by what somebody else is doing. Understand what you can do in your own lane and do that thing, but just don't do nothing.
I appreciate that. And while we're in the kind of lane of resources, are there other groups or folks we could look up, right, that have been able to implement best practices, that have been able to build either community or awareness? And I remember there was the folks from Southern, where they're down in Alabama, like Freddie.
The, yes, the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. We
Yeah,
love
so
the
like
we love the Federation.
folks like that, who are some of the other orgs that if you're out here and you either work in conservation or you're in the not-for-profit world, or you just would like to learn about folks who have done things on the ground and in the offices,
Mhm.
who are some people that you would suggest?
Yeah, definitely the Federation is a good one. They're active like all over the South, working with Black landowners, not just forest landowners, also farmers. So that's a good one. There's an organization that AFF has strong ties with called SFLR, Sustainable African American Land Retention Project. So they have been working with landowners in a number of different southern states as well, Virginia, Georgia, Texas, Arkansas, North and South Carolina, off the top of my head. And so that's a good organization to follow and get engaged with. And any of the individual sites that are member sites of that network are good to engage with. There's an organization called Nature for Justice that I know has like reached out to me and invited me to a number of things in my role. And they're doing a lot of good work with landowners in North Carolina. Um, one of the SFLR sites that is also their leader is on our board at AFF. The Center for Air Property Preservation is a good one because they're dealing with issues of like heirs property and how does that affect land ownership rates. Which, if you don't know, heirs property is basically if you don't have a will or some sort of estate plan in place and you pass away, then anybody who is your heir has then a stake in that ownership and it becomes fractured. And if that continues to happen over generations, it becomes fractured and fractured and fractured. And it makes it easy then for questionable entities to come in, buy out one person, sue the rest of them, take the land and develop it for some other purpose than what it was already. So like if it was agricultural land or forest land, then it makes it easy to take it out of that and put it into some other use. So it's not good for any of the family members involved or for just the conservation space in general. So the Center for Air Property Preservation is doing a lot of good work on that. We've also been working with an organization called the National Indian Carbon Coalition in terms of tribal landowners and tribal communities on carbon. Um, so yeah, I think, there's a lot of a good, I think our CEO is very engaged with the Women's Forest Congress if you're interested in like women's issues and conservation. But so yeah, there's people who are working on racial justice issues, on gender sort of issues. Yeah, I'm trying to
Yeah.
think of this. I don't want to leave anybody out unless somebody listen to this and they're like, why didn't you mention us?
And if you think of any folks, even after, you can send me a link, and we can put it in the description of people to check out. When we're discussing diversity with board members of some of the people at Otsego 2000, pretty quickly I was like, so what do you all mean by diversity? The area up here is 98% homogenous. So what are we trying to do? And I think it hit the awareness of, well, even if there is, or even if there are only 2% of, they make up a certain population in those cities. Let's go speak to them. Let's make sure we don't ignore them. Then within our 98%, we looked at age and why there's such a gap between like the young folks that are outdoors and involved in some of the environmental causes, and then the folks that are closer to retirement age. But there's this whole middle swath of people that don't show up in certain capacities or that aren't as involved. So what we can do, what can we do around that? When we look at gender, I know my partner, when we first started going in certain areas, she's like, I don't feel safe in certain places. I don't know if I want to be out in the woods. There could be some dude out here on the path. And that sometimes gets dismissed instead of understood and navigated. Accessibility. One of the first things when I'm calling around, I'm talking to people and diversity conversations, the question, how can you make the outdoors more accessible? And there are people who'd be like, you can't, you have to be able to walk to do the thing. And other people who are like, here, all the things we've thought of to try to help as best as we can. And you could then see what happens when people try versus when people just say, it's not important. And so I would also want to have us keep in mind diversity is not just monolithic, and it's not just based on a flat identifier, because there's an intersection of identities. You could be a Black, queer, trans. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, as we kind of move towards the end of our discussion, could we maybe talk about a specific example? Like when I was with you all, we went out to a family farm in Tennessee, and it was part of a program you all are running. You all were able to find a Black woman who now has family property, and I think she had close to like 200 acres or something,
Mm-hmm.
that stems back from 1866 or 67 or something. Can you talk a little bit about that program, how she got involved, and what you all are looking to do?
Yeah, now that particular landowner, so before I became our director of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I used to be our Southern regional director. So I was just the person who anybody in the South would contact if they were interested in our program, the Family Forest Carbon Program, which is a program for landowners, for family landowners who own forests and are interested in carbon markets as a means of both having their land be productive and conservation oriented, can be a part of, climate solutions. So she had reached out and was interested in participating, but we weren't actively in Tennessee yet. But we wanted to keep just the relationship going. And we're actually about to be in Tennessee very soon, so hopefully she will be able to sign up. Um, She also she just got her land designated as a tree farm last year. Our flagship program when our organization was first founded was the American Tree Farm System. And so she just got certified as like a tree farm and has access now to the resources and community that's associated with that. Um, but now I'm sort of getting off track by just talking about how that relationship. What did you say? You say the question again?
Well, just like the nature of the program, what it is, as an example of a person who hadn't been working the farm. I believe she's a designer and architect in
Hmm.
whatever close city. Uh, Family members pass, they end up with this property, and they had to figure out how to keep it in the first place and make sure that different people didn't sell off elements of it. And what do you do? Like, basically, the question to a lot of Black folks that have asked me is like, our family left land, it's somewhere I don't want to be. What am I going to do? And so, like, programs like that or other USDA programs do allow for tree farming or do allow for conservation. And it's not a thing of you having to be an industrial farmer per se.
Mm-mm.
So, could you
Yeah.
just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So yeah, in her situation, so yeah, I mean, getting designated as a tree farm, definitely our program has dollars associated with it for people who want to join the Family Forest Carbon program at familyforestcarbon.org, and we are active in New York. Um, they can sign up to do like a improved forest management practice if they qualify and actually get dollars just for being enrolled in that program and doing, you know, whatever management, whether that be active management or passive management on their land. You know, you don't have to live on it. But that particular landowner whose property we visited a year ago, she leases out parts of the land as well. So there are people who are engaged in farming and agriculture and forestry who are not the landowner. They're leasing it, so they're paying money to the owner to do that, and then they're maybe engaged in some USDA programs or whatever. And one of the foresters that we work with at the Federation like helps landowners to navigate those USDA programs. And sign up for things like that. Now, he probably wouldn't advise that somebody lease out their land and then the person who's leasing it does the programs just because he's like that person is making more money on this deal than you are and you're the owner. But I've heard him like say that. But if somebody like was like, I don't want to live on this land, I don't know what to do with it, I don't want to sell it, there's other things that they can do. Um, like being in a carbon program or like engaging in USDA programs or leasing their land out. You know, they have opportunities like that don't involve selling the property. People do hunting leases. Like people might want to pay you money to have a right to go on your land and hunt whatever thing for recreational purposes that they want to. The landowner that we met with last year, her name is Renee. She is doing educational programming, like historic tours and all of that. And she's working with like local historic preservation offices to get to do what she needs to do those tours. They got some signage up on the property and cool stuff like that to just talk about the history of their family and what significance that has to the area. So people have lots of options. And she doesn't live on that property. I think she lives like an hour away. So yeah, people have options.
That's awesome. For the individuals out there, and this is a serious question, but it's not so serious, but it feels serious to me. I feel like sometimes people are afraid to reach out to folks that may be different, right? And so whether
Mm.
we're up north or we're up south, whether it's different racial, ethnic backgrounds, histories, communities, what can we do to encourage people to connect and exchange best practices or communicate like with your org or in how you've made relationships with some of these organizations that are here to amplify or work with historically marginalized communities? How did those relationships come to be? Like, what can we suggest to a place like Otsego 2000 where we want to connect with other people doing cool stuff? Is it as simple as we know that's an all Black organization? Just send them an email. It's okay, even though we're not. Is it a thing of, well, you should be aware of this or that if you're going to engage with communities that have been marginalized and have not necessarily benefited from relationships with majority organizations? What's your take on this?
I mean, definitely reach out because what's the worst that could happen? The worst that could happen is they say no. What's so bad about that? You tried, they said no, you tried. Like, definitely reach out. I mean, like you were talking about, you said you bought this land, you started reaching out to all these organizations. Now look at all the great things that have come from that. All that was a cold email, and now we cool. So,
Yeah.
like, reach out. And quite frankly, when there have been other organizations, and Renee, like she reached out because she was interested in, and then I would have never known that this landowner existed in small town Tennessee who was interested in sharing African American history on her land. I wouldn't have known that if she didn't reach out. So definitely reach out. If you're a part of an organization that has a that you're from a majority identity group, as opposed to a minoritized group, I would say definitely you should be aware of like how people may have been overexploited. So one thing we sometimes see organizations who are white led or white majority, who have diversity needs, like they need to be working with a set of diverse landowners for a grant or something like that, and they don't have that constituent base, so they want to go in with this other organization. You can't just be coming with requests and not with support. Like for one thing, you should be trying to share that money. Like whatever money you don't be just like, can we talk to your landowners? You need to be coming with some money to talk to those landowners. Don't be talking about, can we pick your brain about how to, if we not from the same community and we cool, no, you can't pick my brain. Like we cool, like you and I, whatever. But like if it was like, quite frankly, somebody from a predominant group and we didn't have a relationship and somebody came to me and said something like that, that's like it becomes another form of exploitation that's just not acceptable. I know that the organization I mentioned, Nature for Justice, they do have like roundtables that they will organize for people to come and talk about issues with landowners, and they will say, "We're going to pay you X money for coming to our roundtable because you just came and gave us your thoughts and you let us pick your brain, and so we're going to give you X dollars." When you came and spoke to us for the DEI summit, I didn't ask you to come for free. I said
Right.
we'll pay for your travel and we'll give you a piece of some dollars for your time. Like it's not cool to ask people as if you're at a larger white organization such as the one I'm at to ask smaller black or brown led organizations for their resources and not to compensate them. Now I'll say when the reverse happens, I will never accept that. So like I've had one of our SFLR sites, one of the SFLR sites that I mentioned earlier, who always ask like, "Hey, will you come and be present at this event?" or what have you, and they'll offer an honorarium. I don't ever accept it because I know what organization I'm at, and I'm not going to accept that when it's in the reverse.
Right.
Like, so that's another thing. Like, and I know that I think they've the same thing has happened with other like colleagues and things like our CEO I know has I think not accepted things like that. And so it's just like, no, we want to be here to support you. And I know that we're more resourced or whatever. And this should be a relationship that goes both ways. And just not asking people and then you don't come with any resources. You just want to use them, and then when they need something of you, you don't want to be there to offer the support of whatever they might need when they come needing it. So
Right. I
two-way
think
street, dual benefit.
and being aware of magnitude or understanding the scope or scale so that if you I've met people that work with entities that might have multi-million dollar budgets working with people that are a 2 or 3 person organization and can't make money, and the false equivalence about responsibility or expectation that can come up, I think can cause friction. But the awareness of what support looks like or how people have that circuit instead of just, I need to take from, even though I already have. Um, and I think that is something to be aware of if you are a majority institution. Sometimes, and I've seen this in tech, I've seen this in environmental work, there's an assumption that the minority group needs what is being offered, or its so-called minority group needs what's being offered by the majority group. And there's I won't even say savior complex, but there's a certain amount of condescension, there's a certain amount of arrogance to that. And remembering the human connectivity, remembering that it's a circuit. It's people that have been marginalized have had to figure out how to do it without for a long enough time that I would be careful with the idea that they're waiting for a handout and the arrogance that comes with the idea that the handout is what's needed. But again, partnership, collaboration, human connectivity, I think does read. And I've connected with people in I don't know how many different backgrounds, communities, cultural histories. I think
Mhm.
through that authenticity. Um, Sweet. So before we head out, I want to thank you for volunteering your time. And is there anything you'd like us to know, or any parting shout or words you would like to leave with us in Otsego County?
Hmm. Um, definitely, I guess, just reach out, I guess. If you are interested in anything that I've said here, either reach out to Chris and he can connect us, or yeah, that's probably the way to go. Reach out to Chris and he can connect.
Yes. I would be, I see, yes, I can do that. If you would like to know more about what Dr. Tots does, and I suggest you look in deep, like go into the rabbit hole, the chapters coming out, the writings, just the mind. When we first met, I was very confused by we were talking. I was like, she's just totally bored with what I'm saying, and then I realized like, oh, her brain's firing all over the place right now, and so like, okay, and I've had great discussions, and I'm still learning, and so it's I've been able to appreciate the amount of information and support that you've provided, and I normally don't talk like that, but I'm trying to get better at like recognizing, you know. And so for people out there, if you'd like to know more, hit me up. If you'd like to know more about the American Forestry Foundation, what they're doing, and if in general you'd like to know more about diversity and conservation and environmental justice in the way that we've defined it today, then we can make sure you get that information. All
Yeah.
right.
If you want to put my email in the like description of the thing, you can do that too if you don't feel like fielding a bunch of intermediaries. So I'm gonna leave that to you to decide.
Yeah, I'll make sure you don't get spam from everything on the internet. I'm not gonna put your email out on the YouTube because it's bad out there. You'll be getting
Okay.
phone calls from like Monaco saying that your bank account like
Oh
the
Lord.
scams are heavy out here. All right. Thank you everyone. This again has been Otsego 2000 Presents. My name is Chris Carr. We had Dr. Tots, and enjoy your day. Peace.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.